Now, the first thing I want to talk about is actually a little bit of my past in terms of debugging. I actually got started as a freelance programmer online. One of the first reliable things that I found to do many, many years ago to make money. And one of the easiest jobs that I could get, especially considering I didn't have a ton of experience at that point, was actually debugging work. A lot of times there would be clients willing to pay easily $50 for maybe an hour's worth of work to simply fix a problem that they were having on their website. And it's not that these problems are necessarily hard to fix, but they're just technically a little complicated, and you have to kind of know what you're doing really to actually be able to proceed through this debugging process. So I'm actually going to be teaching you guys tonight my exact process that I go through when I am debugging HTML, PHP, JavaScript, and I'll even briefly touch on CSS at the end of the night, although there's really not a ton of debugging involved with CSS, at least not like there is with the other languages. Now, to start out, before I actually dive into showing you guys some things tonight, I want to mention the coding software that I actually use on a regular basis. I use this for any complicated coding that I'm doing, simply because this software makes it easier to keep everything organized. This is a completely free open source software here, so there's nothing to buy at all. It's called Notepad++. You can see here I've pulled it up on Google at notepad-plus-plus.org. You can download a copy there completely free, once again. And I'm going to be referring to this software a few different times throughout the course of this evening to show you how I actually utilize it to help me out. Now, to get started with, I'm going to begin with HTML debugging, and because I have a decent amount of stuff to go through tonight and to talk to you guys about, I have already gone ahead and punched these examples in on some pages on my site, so I don't have to be sitting here typing all this out for you. So I can hopefully cram a little bit more teaching into tonight's session. Now, to begin with, I'm just going to begin with some very basic HTML debugging. And I'm just going to start out by showing you a few common examples that you will often find repeated over and over again, but perhaps with just different HTML tags. Now, the easiest way you can figure out if you have broken HTML on your website, because there's no error log for this. There's really not even an easy, convenient tool in your website browser like there are for other programming languages to help you with debugging. So you really just kind of have to pay attention to your live websites, and when things are not behaving properly, look at the HTML coding for the site and try to pick out some of these various problems that I'm going to be discussing with you. Now, the first of these is the closing tags in HTML. A lot of times you will have HTML tags that have an opening and a closing tag. One example of this is an HTML link. But this same concept really applies to any HTML tag that is not self-closing, where you need to have an additional closing tag at the end. Otherwise, the browser does not detect that your HTML is done with, and it continues on and creates a little bit of a problem. Now, what I've done here on this particular page is I have created an HTML link, and this HTML link is perfect with one exception. It is missing the closing a HTML tag on the end of it. So before I actually proceed with showing you how you would go about fixing this, I'm going to show you what this actually does on my live website. As you can see down here at the bottom, here is my text link that I created. But since I do not have a closing HTML tag, then the link continues on in my page with the text that is down below it. Whereas obviously I had not intended for this text right here to be part of my link. So this is one of the easiest ways that you can spot this type of problem. It could be with an HTML link, it could be with bold tags or italic tabs or underline tags. It really doesn't matter. As long as some type of HTML effect that you are trying to get to take place and it doesn't end when it is supposed to, it typically indicates well, Clive is asking, how would that tag be missing? I'm really, in this circumstance, I'm really referring to just perhaps HTML coding that you may be creating yourself. A lot of times when people are just getting started out, they may miss simple things as they're going through their programming, like a closing tag, for example. But I have also seen other products out there, other WordPress plugins, for example, especially some of the free plugins that you can download through WordPress. Sometimes there are HTML coding problems in those plugins, and I've found myself countless times going in and correcting these problems to get things to display properly on my website. And again, this could be more than just a missing HTML tag. For example, if you were designing your websites out of div tags and you had a series of them and some of them were grouped together to where you had parent div tags and children div tags, you might perhaps miscount the number of opening and closing tags that you've provided. And that is another very common example, really, of a situation where tags can end up missing. Now, here is the missing tag here at the end of my link. I've just added this in, and just to update the page and show you the differences now, my link is now closed off properly where it is supposed to be. So the main thing to pay attention to here again is just simply looking for your HTML coding to not end when it is intended to end within your web page is usually a very good indication of potentially an HTML problem. Now, the next thing that I would like to show you is actually missing quotes. If you're typing out your links and you simply miss one of the opening or closing quotes within your HTML coding, as you can see at the end of each of these two links, I have actually left off the closing quote mark for the href attribute here. And this works very similar to the previous example that I was showing you, where you get results that are simply not expected. I had two links on the page in my coding here, but when I view my live web page, I'm only seeing one link. And if you actually look down in the bottom left-hand corner of my screen right now, you can see the URL that is being interpreted for this particular link. And it actually includes the normal URL plus some additional HTML coding, which simply should not be there. The reason why this is happening is because of the way your browser processes HTML coding. It looks for an opening quote mark, and whenever that is found, then the attribute that you are creating here is not actually closed until you have offered a closing quote mark. So instead of this URL being closed right here, it's actually not being closed until all the way down here in the second link. And then this website address right here is actually just being completely thrown out because it's recognized as essentially not recognized as a valid attribute. And then this is simply being used as the text for your actual link. Now, I had been talking about Notepad++ before. I want to pull this up real quick for you guys just so you can see why I actually use this. I use this for normal coding, but then I'm also using it for debugging purposes because it will actually point out some of the problems in your coding for you. Now, I've just created a new file on here, but what I'm actually going to do is go in and save this file to a local file on my computer here. Now, down here under Save As Type, you may notice that there are a ton of different types of programming languages that Notepad++ can actually handle. I'm really only interested in a few of them. I will typically save my files as PHP files because a PHP file can actually contain HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and PHP all at the same time. So this particular Notepad++ software will help you to diagnose problems with all those different types of code if you are working in a PHP file. So now what I'm going to do here is to simply paste in this HTML coding that I was using on this previous page. Now this is my bad HTML coding, as I was mentioning before. Now it's actually the coloring of the text within this software, Notepad++, that lets you know when there are problems with your coding. As you can see, the coloring of this first line and this second line are actually completely different in a lot of ways. This should be the first indication that there is a problem here because obviously these are both links which are pretty much similar, so Notepad++ should be interpreting them in a similar manner. Now, just to show you what exactly happens when I correct this coding, I've added in these closing quotes right here. As you can see, these links are both appearing to be relatively the same with the exception of, obviously, the text at the end. Notice how the coloring of the text here. You have your blue text for the tags. You also have blue text right here for the value of the HTML attribute. And then your actual attribute is in red text right here. And then the actual text that is going to show up on your public website, this gets displayed in black text. So it makes it really easy to simply scan through HTML coding and to tell what is getting output in your browser and what is actual HTML coding. But then obviously when you have a problem in your HTML coding, then these colors change and help you to indicate and pick out those problems. Now, as I mentioned before, the blue text is actually used for values of your HTML attributes. Previously, when my coding was correct, just the URL right here was showing up in blue text as the value, but you can see that this blue text actually extends through this first link and into the second link until it hits this second closing quote mark right here. And this is the same exact thing that's actually happening on my live web page. All of this text right here is being interpreted as my URL for this particular link. Going back over here to my live web page real quick, just to add in these quotes here so you can then see how this affects the live website. By simply adding those quotes back in, it fixes the links and allows them to operate as they are intended to operate. Now the next thing that I would like to show you here is actually with your less than and greater than symbols. All HTML tags use less than and greater than symbols. There will be a less than symbol showing up at the front of all of your tags, and then you will have a greater than symbol showing up at the back of all of your tags. And this applies to both self-closing tags and tags that need separate closing tags to work with them. Anytime you actually leave out one of these less than or greater than symbols, it can completely mess up your HTML coding, because the browser is searching for these symbols as an indication that an HTML tag may be starting or ending. So again, by leaving them out, then the browser can't properly interpret your coding. Now in this particular example, I've left out the opening less than symbol in front of this particular HTML tag. Now if you've ever visited one of your own web pages or another web page perhaps and seen HTML coding actually printed out on the page like you see down here, that may be the reason why. It could be a missing tag for this particular missing less than symbol for this particular tag, or it could also be missing less than or greater than symbols for other tags throughout your coding, because basically your browser is looking for a matching tag to go with all of the other tags that are on your page. So when they simply do not match up, then your HTML coding is not processed properly and will oftentimes just get spit out on the page as normal. Now you might notice down here at the end that the closing A tag is actually not displayed in the content of this page right here. Now the reason why this is happening is because that closing A tag is actually correct, whereas this opening A tag is not correct. It does not have an opening less than symbol, so it cannot be properly processed. Once again, if I take this particular coding and load it up over here in Notepad++, you can see that the entire text here is showing up black except for the closing A tag. And once again, this is the exact same thing that is happening on my live website. All of the black text is being displayed on my website, and this is being interpreted as a correct HTML tag, like it's supposed to be. But to fix the opening part of it, I need to add in this less than symbol, and then you can see that my link is automatically corrected with all the colors in it. I can easily identify my attributes in my link and my values for those attributes, and also the actual text that will be displaying on my live website. So it may not seem like a big deal here when you're just dealing with perhaps one simple line of HTML coding, like this link, for example. I think most of you guys can probably look at these examples and immediately notice what is going wrong with them. And that's good, because then when you come across the more complicated situations that you will encounter in real life, then it won't be quite as confusing. And that's when Notepad++ can really come in handy, because when you're dealing with a whole page worth of HTML coding, it may not be quite as simple to pick out the problems. But if you load it up into Notepad++ and just try to pay attention to all of the colors that are used in this software to represent different parts of your code, then you can actually just scroll through your page and easily identify where the problems are occurring. And this makes it obviously a lot easier to diagnose problems, and obviously even much faster to actually get them fixed. Now, beyond all of these HTML examples that I have shown you so far, I'm going to get into a little bit more complicated stuff now and actually go ahead and move on to some PHP examples. Go ahead and close down some of these pages right here so I don't get too many opened up. Now, I'm going to start with a very simple parse error. And PHP debugging is a lot different and honestly a little more complicated than HTML debugging. But on another hand, you actually get some help here, because your web servers will actually give you errors for your PHP coding, whereas it will not do that with your HTML coding. Now, most web servers are set up to properly report these errors to you, but there are sometimes certain web servers where this setting is disabled by default. Now, I've given a basic example here. If you run this particular example in one of your WordPress pages, just these 4 simple lines of code right here, if this produces an error message for you on your live web page, then you know that you're all set and your web server is set up correctly to show you these error messages. Now, I'm going to open up this page here, and you can see this error message that I'm talking about. It is a parse error. Now, if you're not getting these parse errors on your live web pages, you can try to contact your website host and actually ask them to enable this for you. But there is one other option that I want to show you here. I've actually pulled up my FTP software, and I'm in the public HTML directory of one of my WordPress sites here. And as you can see right here, this error log file, there's no extension to it. It's just called error log. If you're not seeing the error messages printing out on your live web page, go into your website using FTP or through File Manager in the cPanel and look for one of these error log files, because it is possible that the error logs may be enabled on your web server, whereas the actual error reporting on your live website may be disabled. Now, in WordPress, every error that is spit out on your public web page will show up in this error log in the public HTML directory if these are enabled on your web server. If you happen to get into doing something like WordPress plugin development at a later point in time, or you run into problems with your actual WordPress plugins, maybe that you're using other people's plugins, if errors are created on the administration pages of WordPress, those errors will actually be added to the error log in the WP admin folder of your website and not in the public HTML folder. So these two particular folders on any given WordPress site are the two locations to always look for these error logs. And these error logs, they simply contain this information right here, along with information to help you identify the error. It gives you like a time that goes along with it. But essentially, all you're looking for are these error messages that are getting spit out here. Now, these error messages are so important because these tell you exactly what is going wrong in your script. Now, I'm going to break down this particular error message here for you guys because my intended purpose with teaching you PHP debugging is not to actually give you a specific example of every situation that you could possibly run into, because that would honestly be near impossible to do. Instead, what I would like to do is actually to teach you guys how to understand these error messages so you can be able to tackle any error message that you see. Now, even if you're not familiar with the information that is in it, I'm still even going to teach you how you could go out on Google, for example, and simply find help for any given error message that you may receive, because 99% of the time a similar error message has occurred on somebody else's website before, and you can often find free information out there that will teach you how to fix these specific error messages. Again, as long as you know what to search for and then what to do with that information to actually get it fixed. Now, at the very beginning of this error right here, the first part that I would like to point out is this says parse error. There are a few different types of errors that you can experience here. You can have parse errors, but you could also have warnings or notices or even fatal errors. So I'm actually going to be going through each of these main different types and explaining them to you in a little bit more detail and then showing you how to resolve them on your websites. Now, the actual error message here is this part of the code right here, this syntax error, unexpected T echo. Now, what this actually means is that there is obviously a syntax error in your code, but a syntax error means that you're not using the proper characters. Essentially, the browser tries to process, or what's also called parse, your code, and it can't make it all the way through your code because it runs into a essentially a technical coding problem. You could think of it in language terms like simply a misspelling. Maybe you type in something wrong, or you simply leave out a character that was supposed to be there. Now, the last part here of this error message, this T echo, this actually helps to tell you what the syntax error is or what is going wrong here. It says that T echo is actually unexpected. So this means that my coding was expecting something else, and instead it ran upon T echo. Now, you may be wondering, what exactly is this T echo? Well, there are a lot of these different representations that are called parser tokens in PHP. I've added a link to this page in your guidebook. Let me pull this up for you over here. this particular page shows you all of these parser tokens. If we scroll down the page here and look for techo, we can see that this is in reference to the echo command. All these different commands here are represented by a different parser token. So what I'm looking for in my code is the command echo, because this command is not expected in my coding. So if I go back to my coding, I can see echo is located right here. But this actual line of PHP programming is actually correct. There's nothing wrong with it whatsoever. So why is my browser telling me that there is an error here with this line? Now I can again confirm this by going a little bit further down in my code. Error right here. See, it says that the error is actually on line number 3. This line number is in reference to all the code here that is on your page. Again, this is really a good job to use Notepad++ for, especially when you're dealing with a lot of coding. Sometimes you may end up working with scripts that are hundreds or even thousands of lines long each. So obviously you wouldn't want to have to sit there and count your line numbers out. By simply pasting that into Notepad++, your line numbers are done for you over here on the left-hand side of the page. So you can see that line number 3 is indeed the echo line. Obviously, it would have been easy to count that, but had there been a lot more code, it wouldn't have quite been that simple. So again, going back to why is this error saying that the problem is on line 3? Well, it's not necessarily indicating that your coding error is on this line number, but it's saying that the error itself is occurring when this line number is being processed. So since this techo is unexpected, then what I'm actually going to do is look before my techo, because my coding is looking for something else right here and not echo. And so I move back up to my other line of coding. Now, if you remember back to the PHP session of this series, I taught you about semicolons being needed at the end of each of your lines of PHP programming to separate them from the next line. This is one of those situations. I'm simply missing a semicolon right here. And because I was missing that semicolon, then echo down here was not expected, because this particular line of coding had not yet been closed off. So this is where these semicolons become very important, because they can simply cause errors on your page. You can see now that when I correct this error, that the number 1 is displayed on my page, which is what is supposed to happen with this particular code, because it is echoing the value of my variable a, and the value is the number 1. The next thing I would like to show you guys here, let me close these other pages down. I'm going to get a little bit more complicated here with the PHP programming and the errors that it can display. And this particular error here is related to this if-else statement that I have created. Now, to show you the actual error message that is showing up on my page here, I am again getting a parse error with a syntax error, but this time it's telling me something different. It is saying unexpected end, and there's a $sign in front of end. Well, going back over to my code, I don't have a variable called end in my coding. anywhere. So what exactly is this referring to here? Again, if I go to that parser token page that I was just showing you a moment ago, if you scroll through that whole page, you'll actually notice that this particular parser token is not shown there. And it's because this is actually not a parser token. End represents the end of your PHP coding. So this is essentially the bottom of my page down here. Now I can confirm this by taking all of my coding and moving it over into Notepad++ once again. This gives me my line numbers over here on the left-hand side of the page. I flip back over to this error message, and you can see here that the problem is on line number 11. And you can see down here in my page that line number 11 is the end of my code. It's actually a blank line. But that's simply because there is a blank line down here in this coding. If I were to delete that blank line, then it would tell me line number 10 instead. You can see now it is saying that the error is on line number 10. So this error is indicating that essentially the end of your PHP code was reached, the end of your script was reached, and it was not expecting for your script to be over because it wasn't completed in one way or another. Now, what is actually missing here is when you see one of these unexpected end error messages, it is almost always going to be a missing closing curly bracket. You can see here in my if statement, I have the opening curly bracket right here and the closing curly bracket here, but then I also have a second opening curly bracket right here, and there is not a closing curly bracket anywhere else in my code. So if I simply add this curly bracket onto the end here, update my coding, and refresh my page, the error message now goes away because there are no longer any syntax errors in this code. Once again, I'm going to run back over here to Notepad++ just to show you another trick that you can use this software for to help you identify these situations. Wherever I click with my mouse cursor, if I actually click immediately before or after one of these curly brackets, you can see that it gets highlighted in red, and the matching curly bracket for it is also highlighted in red. So this becomes very, very helpful when you're dealing with especially large, complicated scripts where you're going to have tons of opening and closing curly brackets all throughout your programming. You can easily identify the matching curly bracket by simply clicking on one. Now, if I click on this very last curly bracket right here, you'll see that it didn't highlight it in red, and that it's not highlighting any other curly brackets. This is actually happening because there is no matching curly bracket for this particular one right here. But if I add it on like I did in my page over here, you can see that now both of them get highlighted red when I click on them. Now, this same concept also works for parentheses, for example. You can click on an opening or closing parentheses, and it will automatically mark the matching parentheses for you. I personally find this particular feature to be extremely handy when it comes to my own coding. You also have these little boxes that show up here next to your coding. As you can see, there is a box here, and then a little bit further down the page, there is this small horizontal line showing up right here. if I actually click on this box to the left, it collapses all of the code for this particular statement. It recognizes that this if statement is completely ending down here on line number 8. So you can completely collapse that. And again, this can be helpful if you're dealing with extremely large scripts, and perhaps you know for a fact that one portion of your script is completed and completely free of bugs, for example. Then you can actually bring your script here into Notepad++ and simply collapse the area of code that you don't want to mess with anymore and only work with the remaining parts of the code. You can also see on the left here that even my line numbers are collapsed for me. So this doesn't alter the counting of the lines of my code here. Now, I would like to take this same tutorial right here and change it around just slightly. I'm actually going to remove an opening curly bracket. So there is a missing opening curly bracket now instead of a missing closing curly bracket. And the reason why I want to do this is because the error message that you receive is actually different. If I refresh my page here, you can see I'm still given a parse error and a syntax error, but now I'm being told that a closing curly bracket is unexpected. And this is should be fairly obvious here. When you have an unexpected closing curly bracket, then chances are you either have a closing curly bracket too many, one that simply is not needed in your coding at all, or you have simply missed a curly bracket somewhere within your coding. So by just adding the curly bracket back in wherever it is supposed to go, you can fix this particular parse error fairly easily. Now, the next part that I would like to talk about is actually a warning error. Now, just to explain a little bit of a difference here between these errors, as you can see here with this parse error, the rest of my page still gets displayed. However, if I actually had some additional coding down here below where my error was, my error is located right here, and then I have additional coding down below the error. So if I update this, you can see that the additional coding down below my error does not get processed. And this is happening because of the type of error that we're dealing with here. Parse errors, syntax errors, are essentially errors that will force your script to stop running because it's not able to effectively continue to process the remaining code in your script. However, a different kind of message called a warning error is actually able to continue to process additional coding in your script. Now, these error messages, they are warning messages and not parse error messages, for example, simply because they are not considered to be critical errors within your code. They don't completely prevent your coding from running. It's simply a minor problem that has been encountered, so that one portion of your code cannot be processed, but the rest of the coding on your page can be processed. Now, to show you what I've done here, at the top, I have this group of coding. Everything I have highlighted here, this involves the incorrect portion of my code. This very last statement down here, this is completely fine. There's nothing wrong with this line of coding right here. So when I view my live web page, you can actually see that this line of text still gets displayed even though another error was encountered on this page. And this is happening because it is the warning error and not a more serious type of error. Now, the actual error message here is invalid arguments supplied, and then it gives me for each right here. For each is actually a PHP function. So what this warning is telling me is that the argument or arguments that I've provided for this particular function are invalid in one way or another. Looking back at my code, the for each PHP function here, if you remember back to the PHP training, this is actually used to loop through arrays, whereas in this situation, I'm actually attempting to loop through what is just a standard variable. So it is unable to loop through this variable right here because it is invalid. Now it is invalid because it's the wrong type of information that this function is intended to help you process. So if I simply change my variable into an array, and then add, for example, 2 different values into it, then now when my coding is run, this for each function will be able to properly run because the information being passed to it as an argument is now no longer valid. When I refresh my page, you can see that the error message disappears. It prints out the values contained within my arrays and still processes the extra command down at the bottom of the coding. So with these particular error messages, obviously the rest of your page could continue to run and function as it was normally intended to run. However, if the correct parts of your page depend on any information from the parts of your page that are generating those errors, then it can still mess up other portions of your coding that are not technically having anything wrong with them. Now, the last type here that I would like to talk to you about is called a fatal error. Looks like I'm logged out of my site. Now, a fatal error is different from the warning errors and even the parse errors simply because a fatal error completely shuts down everything. Now, you may be thinking that the parse error also completely shut down everything, but there's actually a difference here between these two types of errors. Notice this fatal error. All the way at the bottom, after the fatal error is over with, notice that the bottom of my WordPress site, the footer down here, and also the sidebar over here, these are no longer showing up when I have a fatal error in my page. However, when I had the parse error in my page, which still shut down coding in that particular script, it still allowed everything after it to run. And the reason why this is happening is because the rest of the WordPress site here, the sidebar and the footer, these are being generated from a parent script. However, with a fatal error will also shut down parent scripts from continuing to run after that point. And the reason why this happens is because a fatal error is simply something that PHP cannot get past. It just simply cannot continue to run until the fatal error has been corrected and taken care of on the site. Now with this particular example, the actual error here, let me go back to the error message. It says call to undefined function, and then it states a function name. Now this should seem fairly self-explanatory to start out with. The error message right here is telling you almost exactly what is going wrong. I'm calling a function which has not been defined in my code. And then it gives me the function name that I am trying to call, and then it tells me the line number that I am trying to call it on. So if I go back to my coding and pull it into Notepad++, for example, and then go back and look at my line number, this is saying line number 6 has my error message, and it is calling an undefined function called my custom function name, displayed right here on line number 6. Now, if you look up above here, I have declared a function called my custom function name. However, I've included underscores in the actual function declaration, whereas when I'm calling that function, I'm calling it by the wrong name, basically. Now this could happen if you simply misspell your function name. It could also happen if you're using a different case, for example. Lowercase and uppercase letters are interpreted differently in this regard. So you simply want to make sure that any function that you have called is already defined in your coding, or else it will cause one of these fatal errors. Now there are some other situations that can cause these fatal errors to occur, such as you remember me talking about the WPDB class that is included in WordPress. If you try to create a class, for example, and it doesn't exist, you could also run upon one of these fatal errors. And again, this completely shuts down all of the coding on your page, even including coding that is going on in a parent script. As you can see here in WordPress, again, it removes my sidebar and my footer, because once this error is reached, everything else that attempts to run after that is shut down. Now, this particular error message, since you see that other stuff is showing up before the error message, this is only going to occur when it is being called by a parent script. Now what I mean by parent script, just to make sure that all of you guys know what I'm talking about here, is WordPress is actually the parent script here. Anytime you access a page within a WordPress site, you're actually accessing the index.php file in the public HTML directory of that WordPress site. And that file, the programming in that file, then calls all of the other base WordPress code, including your theme coding and plugin coding, for example, and processes all of that together in one location so it can make everything work together as intended. So WordPress is your parent script, and your child script is your actual WordPress page here. Now, these error messages, this part right here in the middle that is in bold, I haven't mentioned this yet, so I'm going to mention this to you here real quick. This is actually in reference to the file where the error is occurring. Now, you may notice from what this is saying here that this actually has nothing to do whatsoever with this particular page that I am visiting. Obviously, the error is contained within the coding here that I've created for this page, but my PHP error is not referencing this page whatsoever. This is actually happening because of the plugin that I am using on my WordPress site to process the PHP code. You remember me talking about the exec PHP WordPress plugin that you activate on your site, and then you can use PHP coding actually in the content of your pages. So what this is telling me is that my error is happening in a file that is part of this exec PHP plugin. However, this last part of it right here says eval code. What this is actually meaning is that the code is not actually located in this particular file right here. The actual code is located somewhere else, and this code is simply calling it and then evaluating the code. This eval is actually a PHP function that can be used to where you could actually write out PHP coding as text and, for example, save it into a PHP variable. And then you send that variable as an argument for this eval function right here, and it will actually process that text string as though it was PHP coding. So this is actually how this exec PHP plugin is accomplishing this PHP coding within your pages, because it takes all of this PHP code. Anytime it sees an opening and a closing PHP tag, it strips out all of the code from the middle of it and simply evaluates it as a text string, which is then, processed as PHP coding. So the reason why I wanted to explain all this to you guys is because if you're doing programming outside of WordPress, for example, then this text that is in bold right here may very well actually point to the file with the error in it. However, within WordPress and using this exec PHP plugin, all of the error messages will actually end up displaying just like this one right here. It won't tell you the location of the error, which is typically what this is intended for. It will tell you which file on your web server you can find this error located in. And again, the main exception to that is when you see right after that it is eval code. It could simply be code called from another script. Again, even if you don't see this eval code statement right here, if you're using scripts where perhaps you have a primary script that is being loaded, and then that script is calling additional PHP scripts, if your error is located in one of those additional PHP scripts, it will actually tell you that the error is located in your primary script instead. So this should really just be used as a bit of a reference tool to help to ensure yourself that you are searching for your errors in the correct location. You really don't want to end up pulling up the wrong file, for example, and hunting through hundreds or even thousands of lines of code for something that doesn't even exist in that file. So that can actually help to save you a ton of time. Now, the next thing that I want to go into is actually JavaScript. But before I dive into this, I should probably ask, does anybody have questions on either HTML or the PHP debugging up through this point? Anything I've talked about tonight, or perhaps even a question that maybe you just happen to have that that maybe I didn't even mention this evening so far. Instead of piling all this on you, I thought I would at least stop halfway through and see if you guys have any questions tonight. And if there are no questions for right now, then I can go ahead and move on. No questions? Okay, I'll go ahead and proceed. I'll still stop at the end of the webinar tonight again, and pause for more questions from you guys. So, JavaScript debugging. Now, I know I didn't actually teach you guys JavaScript in this Techie masterclass. However, I still wanted to teach you about JavaScript debugging because I actually started learning JavaScript by simply debugging it, and typically working with other people's scripts. Perhaps I was trying to make minor modifications to them, or simply get two scripts to work together in one way or another. I would often find myself running into various JavaScript problems that I really wasn't quite sure how to solve. So even though I didn't actually know JavaScript programming at the time, I still found that I was able to diagnose and fix these JavaScript errors, because a lot of the basic concepts of programming languages, they're not just for one programming language. There are a lot of similar concepts in PHP as there are in JavaScript, for example. There are just simply different ways of using them, and perhaps slightly different syntax to use to get the code to process properly. But when you're dealing with the actual JavaScript error messages, you can easily take these and go search for them on Google to try and get additional help. Now, I'm not going to show you this in detail here, but in the guidebook for tonight's session, I wanted to put something in there relating to WordPress and JavaScript, because this is actually one particular area, and really a large part of the reason why I wanted to teach you guys a little bit about JavaScript debugging is because a lot of people contact me with problems like this, and the problems usually end up being a conflict in JavaScript between two different WordPress plugins, for example. So I'm actually going to teach you guys how to try and spot these JavaScript errors, and even if you can't figure out a way to fix them, if you're dealing with a WordPress site, for example, and you install some new plugins, and all of a sudden maybe things are not working correctly on your live site anymore, this can actually help you to figure out which plugin is the offending plugin causing the problems for you. Now, one of the main reasons why there are these problems in existence with WordPress plugins and JavaScript is actually because of inexperienced WordPress plugin developers, where they will load up JavaScript into their plugin, and not properly load that JavaScript through WordPress. Now, when you're just dealing with JavaScript itself, this isn't necessarily that important. However, if you're trying to deal with something called jQuery, which is actually a JavaScript library that is very, very commonly used on WordPress and also in WordPress plugins these days. Anytime this jQuery library is used in a WordPress plugin, if jQuery is not loaded correctly through WordPress and your JavaScript coding is then not loaded correctly through that same avenue, then your script may work fine, actually. But then any other plugins on the site that depend on jQuery may end up being broken. So in the guidebook, just in case you are ever running across one of these situations where you have found that one particular plugin is not properly loading the JavaScript in it, as long as you know the JavaScript file that needs to be loaded, I've provided some example coding in the guidebook that can be used. It is actually PHP coding that is used within a WordPress plugin to then load up jQuery and your JavaScript file from your plugin or somebody else's plugin, for example. And then it loads all this properly into WordPress using what is called WordPress actions. And these WordPress actions essentially allow you to add your own coding to various parts of the WordPress coding. Now again, I'm not actually going to go through this exact example that I have added in this guidebook because there's not a practical use for it inside of a WordPress page. However, I do have another JavaScript example here that I am going to walk through with you guys. However, I still wanted to add that additional information into the guidebook and at least talk about it with you guys for a few minutes tonight. Now, to start out with here, I've created this page. This page has an HTML link on it, but then everything else on the page here is actually JavaScript coding. Now, if you ever find the need to load JavaScript into one of your WordPress pages, for example, let's say you're looking to get your page to do something particular and you find a JavaScript software out there that may be just a free little code snippet, for example, or even JavaScript coding that comes from, say, Facebook or Google, for example. They sometimes have these different tracking pieces of JavaScript. You can enter all of this into your WordPress pages to get them to work, as long as they're not heavily dependent on using jQuery. Now, for this particular example that I'm set up here, I'm actually using jQuery within my WordPress page. Now, the reason why I'm doing this and not actually using the special coding that I had put in the ebook that is used to load jQuery, for example, I'm not using that because the WordPress theme that I'm using on this particular site is already using jQuery. It already automatically loads it. And this is the same theme, the free theme that I have been mentioning throughout this series and even other training materials that I've put out there. It's called Weaver 2. Just search for it through the WordPress themes page, and you can install it for free. Now, when I visit my actual live web page here, at a first glance, it may not appear as though anything is wrong. There is a link right here. I could still click on this link, and it still takes me to the desired web page. So the only reason that I would actually know that there is something wrong is because I know there's JavaScript in this page and something else is supposed to be happening that is not actually happening. So when you think you may be encountering a JavaScript error, I use Firefox, for example, for this particular purpose, but there are other similar features in other browsers that can allow you to do the same thing. But for this tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to do it in Firefox. Start by clicking on the menu up in the top left-hand corner of your browser, and then go down to Web Developer, and then finally you want to go down here to the Error Console. And this Error Console, you have a number of different tabs up here. The main ones that I would like you to pay attention to are the Errors tab and the Warnings tab, and then also the Clear button. This isn't actually a tab. This just simply clears out any errors that are already shown in there. So when you are looking at a page that may possibly have an error in it, if you're not sure if the error is coming from this particular page or not, because if an error shows up in here, this error could technically be from any one of these other tabs that you have open. So to ensure that it is happening on this exact web page, you can verify that by first clearing out the existing error messages and then simply refreshing your page. Now, after you refresh the page and look at the error console again, if this particular error message is still showing up, then you know that is actually happening on this page or as a result of something being called on this page. Now, in this error console here, you're given different pieces of information to help you figure out what is going wrong. To start out with, this black text up at the top here, this is your actual error message. It says reference error link URL is not defined. Directly below that, you are given a URL. This URL tells you the web page that the error is coming from. As you see that this is the actual web page that I am on right now. However, it may not actually always tell you the exact same website address. For example, if this error existed in JavaScript coding that was in a separate JavaScript file that was being called on this site, then it would reference that particular JavaScript file and not this actual page URL. But since I have actually included the JavaScript coding physically in the page, then that's why it is telling me here that the error is actually occurring on this page. And then over here on the right-hand side, just like with the PHP debugging, we also have a line number that it gives us for reference here that we can use to help to hunt down this error message to get it fixed. Now, I had mentioned to you earlier with PHP programming that you can actually take these error messages and go search for them on the internet to find out how to fix them. So this, for this example, I'm going to do just that for you and show you my process that I go through. This can be done for PHP, or it can also be done for JavaScript, or if you honestly find yourself having a question about anything specific in HTML or CSS even, this would also work just as well. You can almost find information on any given programming or web design subject, often in a lot of detail on the internet, and typically completely for free. The only problem is you usually have to know exactly what you're looking for, or it might not be that easy to find. So for this particular example, what I'm going to do is take this error message right here, and I'm just simply going to search this in Google. So I'm going to type in reference error, link URL is not defined. Now, when I search this particular phrase, and I look at the results that are being shown to me. If I'm looking at just the top 3 results, I believe these are the 3 results that I referenced in the guidebook as well. Hopefully they're actually the same 3 results here, because those do tend to change over time. But you can actually see that a decent portion of the titles here are very, very similar to what I have searched. I see reference error getting highlighted here, and I also see this is not defined portion also showing up in each of these searches. However, the word that is in between all of that is different in each of these situations, especially from my own. I'm using link URL. This one says string. This one says CK editor, and this one says YUI. So what this is indicating to me is that this particular portion of my error message might actually just be related to the particular script that I am using. This might actually be a variable in my script that I have used. So whenever you're searching for something, if you don't see the exact error that you're searching for, try to pick out the parts of it that are similar, and try to weed out the parts of it that are not similar. Again, the link URL portion of it right here. So now what I'm actually going to do now is just to get a little bit more information. You could go in and look at some of those pages that were given as search results, or you could even try to refine your search a little bit. I am refining my search a little bit because I know that part of my original error message is unique to my own script. So I want to search for something that's not going to be unique to my own script. I actually want to search for some kind of general JavaScript error reference document. So all I did here was type in the term JavaScript and then just simply type in reference error, the beginning of the error message that was shown here in my error console. And when I do that, that brings up a whole nother list of results. And up here at the top is actually Mozilla.org. Mozilla is the company behind Firefox. And these are developer documents. So this actually, to me, looks like a very, very good source of reliable information that I can depend on for this particular error message that I'm dealing with. And I actually don't even have to go into the page to look at this in this particular example, because this description right here is basically telling me what is going wrong. Represents an error when a non-existent variable is referenced. Now, if I didn't know what that means, I could go into that page or even look at some of these other pages to try to figure out exactly what the problem is. But knowing this information right here, that I am referencing a non-existent variable, I am then going to return back to my coding to see if I can try to figure out what is going wrong. Now, where'd my error console go? Let me pull back up my error console over here. Looking at this error message again, I had figured out that the link URL portion of this error message seemed to be unique and was not commonly out there in the searches that in the search results that I was finding. So I want to go and look for this phrase in my coding. Now what I've actually done here is all my pages keep minimizing themselves. What I've actually done here is this URL down here below the error message. Instead of opening the source code of this page and hunting down this line number manually, in Firefox at least, you can just simply click on that link. And it automatically scrolls in the content of my page to that exact line number, and it highlights it for me. So this makes it really, really easy to try to hunt down these problems. In this particular example, the string that I was looking for here, this link URL, you can see that in line 244 that that phrase is used right here at the end. And the error message is telling me that this is simply not defined, that I haven't provided a value for this particular variable that I'm trying to reference. So the variable just doesn't exist. Well, this tells me that either I have misspelled it here or simply typed it in wrong in one way or another, or perhaps I have done the same thing elsewhere in my script. Maybe I misspelled it somewhere else, and I'm thinking this is the correct spelling, but perhaps I misspelled it where I actually defined it. So what I want to do is then to look through the rest of my JavaScript coding. Now, the JavaScript coding for this example is only this tiny bit of code right here, so I'm not dealing with a whole lot of JavaScript coding. And I want to try and identify where that variable is being defined. And if I look at the line directly above it, you can see that this line says var, which stands for variable. This is actually how JavaScript defines local variables. They do not use the $ symbol like PHP will. They will simply use this var string. And again, this is only used when you're actually declaring the variable. And then immediately after that is the name of the variable that you're declaring. And at first glance, it actually looks like the same thing. This also says link URL, and this says link URL. However, the main difference here that you need to notice is actually the whether the letters are lowercase or uppercase. These JavaScript is case sensitive, so this variable right here and this variable right here are actually two completely different variables. If I were to define this variable properly, I could actually use both of these variables in my coding. Sure, it would make things a little confusing because I would really not want to be dealing with variables that are named so similar. However, if you know, it is something that is easier for you to do, then you know, by all means, whatever works the best for you ultimately. In the actual coding here, the real problem is that my link URL variable are simply named differently in these two situations. So knowing this information, I can then return to my original script and go to the line of code where the error is located. And since I know that this variable is getting defined right here, all I have to do is simply change the variable name to correctly match it. And I'm not logged into my site. 1 second. Okay. So I'm changing the variable name right here to match the other variable name. And then I am updating my page. Now when I return to the page and refresh it, you now see that this little dialog window pops up on my screen and says that the URL of the link is, and then it tells me the exact URL that is used for this particular link right here. And again, this is JavaScript that is accomplishing all this for us. Now, if I return to my error console, clear everything out, and refresh my page, and look at it again, I can see that there are now no longer any error messages here. Typically, if you have an error message that is being generated by JavaScript on any given page of your site, most of the time the other JavaScript on that site or on that particular page will not be able to run. So all it takes is one bad line of JavaScript coding and it can break the rest of the JavaScript coding on the entire page or potentially even on the entire website if that error exists on every page. So for this particular reason is why I wanted to show you some of this JavaScript debugging, even though I didn't actually teach you guys JavaScript in this particular course, just because I have found a lot of situations before where before I learned JavaScript, for example, where I would think that I had created an error on one of my web pages with my HTML or PHP programming, for example, and it turns out that the error was a JavaScript error that wasn't even from my coding at all. But it ended up affecting my coding as a result of the error and that code not getting processed properly. So in that regard, I felt like it was really, really important to take some time and show a few of these things to you guys. Now, one other tool that you can use in your browser here to help you with debugging, this could be for HTML debugging or CSS or even JavaScript debugging. Basically, anything but PHP. This is actually the source code of your page. Now, you can access this through your menu here. Go to Web Developer and go down to Page Source, or you can also access this by right-clicking on the page and click on the View Page Source button. And what this does is it brings up the source code for this entire web page. Now, this is not necessarily the same exact coding that you have in your page right here. This page source coding is actually the live coding on the web page that you are viewing. So, for example, let's say you have PHP programming that is creating HTML coding for you. For example, last week when I did the complete example, the form processing script at the end, that PHP script was generating some HTML coding. Well, if you had an error in that HTML coding, it might not be as easy to pick that HTML coding out of your PHP coding. However, especially if maybe that PHP coding is being dynamically generated, which last week's form processing script was doing, which basically means that the information contained within that HTML code can change depending on the information that I'm trying to display on the site. In last week's example, it was the user records, the messages that they were entering into that form. So those were being displayed dynamically. Now, if I had had an error in that HTML coding that was being displayed dynamically, the only way to retrieve that actual live HTML coding is using this method right here, viewing the source of the page. Now, just to point out a couple of things in here, you can see at the top of your page, you should see a header tag. And a little bit further down the page, you should be able to find a matching closing header tag. Typically, a large majority of the CSS coding that is on your site, all of this right here, and also JavaScript coding that is being loaded on your site, you can typically find where that is being loaded from in this header section of your page. For example, WordPress is loading up numerous CSS files that control the design of your page. A lot of times these will be like, this is your theme loading up the CSS code that it needs to make your website look in a particular manner. But then you also have JavaScript coding being called from here as well. This is one way that you can figure out for certain whether jQuery is being used on your site or not. If you view the source of your page, look for a JavaScript tag that is being called and references a file called jQuery.js. Now, one of the easiest ways that you can pick out jQuery conflicts between other two plugins, for example, is look for this jQuery line to be printed twice somewhere within the header content of your page. Now, it may not be referencing the exact same jQuery file, but essentially, if your page is referencing more than one jQuery file, especially different locations of that file. One may be located on your website, for example. There are a lot of other plugins that will load jQuery directly from Google and their code repository, for example. And that is simply the incorrect way to do it. With WordPress, you need to be using this standard WordPress jQuery file, or else this can break all of the other jQuery coding that is being used on that particular page. Now, I'm not going to be diving very deep into CSS troubleshooting in this particular series, or probably any other series for that matter, just simply because there really is not a lot to debugging CSS. Typically, to even notice that you have a problem with your CSS coding, 99 times out of 100, the way that's going to present itself to you is by simply something on your page that doesn't display correctly or doesn't show up where it is supposed to show up. So if you have any kind of problems with your CSS coding, perhaps you type in some CSS code to try to get it to change one of the elements on your page, and then you go to refresh your page and those changes don't actually take effect. Number one, I recommend to start by looking at the identifiers for your CSS coding. Looking at the source code for this page again, just to pull up some actual CSS coding so I can show you what I'm referring to in case you don't remember back to the CSS lesson from a couple of weeks ago. An identifier is right here at the beginning. You have your identifier followed by an opening curly bracket, followed by your CSS commands and values for those commands. Each of your commands should be separated from the value by a colon, and then you should use a semicolon to close off all of your values for your commands. And then at the end, you use a closing curly bracket. And this closes off the coding that is used for this particular CSS identifier. So if your coding is not properly taking effect on your page, first check out your identifiers and make sure you're actually referencing the element correctly to begin with. If you do find that you are referencing the element correctly to begin with, there is a slight chance that the problem could be as a result of other CSS code that is already on that page. For example, if I were to have CSS coding further down this page that was essentially trying to do change some of the same attributes that are being altered right here, then this earlier CSS code in my page content might not actually get processed correctly because it would be overwritten by the later coding. Now, one way of overcoming this is right at the end of your value here, before the semicolon, just add a space and an exclamation point and the word important, and it will simply tell CSS not to override that particular setting in your code. Now, in addition to standard syntax problems or identifier problems or CSS conflicts, the other way that you can identify CSS errors on your site is actually through this warnings tab. Now, I'm opening up this warnings tab, and as you can see, there are actually tons of warnings in here. And this is actually one reason why I don't recommend using this warnings tab unless you're just completely stumped as far as what your problem might be in your CSS coding. The reason for that is because warnings can exist here in this error console and not actually be causing any problems on your live website. And that is simply because of the way CSS works with different browsers. You have some browsers that have commands that only work for that particular browser, for example, and then you have other commands that, here is a good example of one right here. This WebKit command is actually for a specific browser. So you will often have these warning messages in this error console talking about a specific line of CSS code, for example, and there may not actually be a problem. As you can see here, all of these warning messages that are shown, this is actually located within the CSS code for WordPress itself. This is the base WordPress code, and there are essentially errors in it. And it's not really that there are errors in WordPress, it's that these particular CSS commands just maybe they don't apply to this particular browser or this situation, for example. That code is still attempted to be processed, but it may not actually be able to truly complete processing on the site, which is then why those warning messages are displayed in the error console. Now, does anybody have questions about either JavaScript debugging or CSS debugging, or even anything else I've covered tonight, or perhaps even anything else that I've covered throughout the entire Techie Masterclass series? I don't mind answering pretty much any questions you guys might still have at this point. I'd like to make sure that everybody has understood all of the information that I have tried to teach over the course of the last 5 weeks, and just help to clarify some of that for you guys if there is something in particular that maybe is a little bit confusing to you still, or maybe that you are just looking to have some extra clarification about it. Feel free to type in questions you may have at any time, and I'd be more than happy to answer them for you. Will, is the ASON class going to involve using a lot of PHP and CSS? No. Will's referring to my next webinar series that'll be starting in August. I'm going to be building an Amazon site from start to finish. I will be using HTML and CSS in that particular class while building the Amazon website. However, it will be fairly simple HTML and CSS just to help to display the various portions of my page to create my category links within the content of my pages, and to help add a little bit of extra design to it. Okay, phew. That's good. Yeah, I'm not going to be doing PHP programming in for the Amazon sites. Not to say that I've never used PHP programming on my Amazon sites, but for this particular series, I'm going to try not to get into anything that is too complicated. Any other questions, guys? I've still got a good 15 minutes or so left in tonight's session. I kind of half expected a lot of questions at this point. Let's see, Stan, will you show, or did I miss how to connect link pages on a site? I'm assuming you're referring to within the actual content of a site, for example. I'll pull up this Amazon site that I've made in the past. Like right here, how at the bottom of my article, then I have these different sections of my site that are then linked to other pages of my site. I will be going over this in the Amazon class. This is what I was referring to, talking to Will just a moment ago. I'll be showing you guys how I create these. This is basically just done with HTML and CSS coding. And then within that HTML and CSS coding, the actual links are nothing more than just basic HTML links. I've just simply arranged and styled up those links in a particular way to go in the rest of my content. I'm pretty sure you're in the Amazon series coming up, aren't you already, Stan? Just wanted to make sure that. Okay, good. I just want to make sure you're actually in there, so it's not something that you'll miss. It's a fairly basic concept. All you're really doing is just like I've done on some of these other pages where I simply have a link. You're just creating a standard HTML link just like this, but then you're surrounding that HTML link in other HTML, and then even designing that HTML with some CSS coding. Not a problem at all, Stan. I'm the same way with a lot of stuff. Programming seems like it comes fairly naturally to me at this point. It kind of does, but trust me, when I first got started, I was completely clueless and horribly lost. My best recommendation for continuing to try to learn these various programming languages is to just simply do some experimenting and try to make some changes to existing coding that might already be out there. Go out and find some HTML coding examples and try to understand them and try to maybe change around certain aspects of that coding and still get it to work without generating errors or looking incorrect, for example. This was actually how, in the beginning, while I had some programming knowledge from other programming languages, not website programming languages, actual computer programming languages, or even I used to program graphics calculators back in the day when I was a little high school nerd. Things like that, I learned it all from examples and just doing it myself. And all the website programming just kind of came along from taking existing websites that I had and just digging into the code and trying to understand it and rearrange certain parts of it, change your text. Really, it's the simple stuff like that can help you to grasp these concepts on a larger scale. And don't be afraid to use Google. Despite all of my years and years of experience, Google is still my best friend in the world because Google can teach me pretty much anything that I need to know as long as I know what I'm looking for. And I think that might be the hardest concept for most people, is that maybe they're just not quite sure what to be looking for to get that proper help with. But if you can understand at least the basics of these programming languages, it can make that a lot easier because you understand at least the basics of it and can convert what you're thinking you would like to do into, words to punch in to your search engine to actually find the help that you need. Still got a little bit of time. Still have a little time left if somebody else has additional questions for me. Don't be shy. I see at least a couple names out there. I don't recall if you guys have asked me questions through the entire series, really. So, if you perhaps haven't had the time to go through all of this content yet, that's quite all right. If you find that you have questions at a later point in time, as long as it deals with stuff that I have covered in this Techie Masterclass, I really don't mind if you guys would like to contact me through Facebook or through email or through my support system, for example, and just, ask for a little bit of clarification or help with this type of stuff. And be more than happy to take a little bit of my time to help point you in the right direction. You're very welcome, George. Happy to help out in that way. I know that some people process this information a little faster than others, and there are also some people out there who perhaps have not attended all of the live sessions. I notice at least some of you guys have been here for every single one of the sessions, but then there are some other people who, maybe they have scheduling conflicts and haven't been able to attend all the live sessions. You can still, ask questions after that point. You're not completely out in the dark and by yourself just because you missed one of these live sessions. Now, just to make sure that all of you guys have this link, this should have been sent out before tonight's webinar in the reminder. This is the link to the full Techie Masterclass on my website. And this is not something you buy, something you already bought. This is all of the ebooks and the recordings from this entire series. That page currently has absolutely everything from this whole series with the exception of tonight's recording, which I will be posting on there, should be no later than this time tomorrow. So I'm going to continue to leave that page set up, I suppose, as long as nobody decides to go out and share it publicly. If that were to happen, then I'd arrange something else for you guys and get that set up for you somewhere a little more privately. But you can use that link, and those videos and those ebooks will always be there for you. Go back and take a look at them anytime that is convenient for you, or use them for reference later on when you're actually trying to put some of these skills into use on your own websites. Any other questions, you guys? Still got just a little bit longer here. Just in case nobody has any additional questions, while you are all still here, I just wanted to say thank you for joining me for this Techie Masterclass, and I hope you guys have really enjoyed it and learned something from it, and are able to take away something valuable from this experience to help you out with your websites or your online marketing business, whatever direction you happen to be looking to take. Let's see, Will, the Amazon course starts on August the 9th at 7 p.m. And then each of the sessions for that are 6 days after the previous session. Clive, thanks for a great series, Ryan. I love that you have put everything on the TMC page. Thanks again. You're very welcome, Clive. Thank you very much for joining as well. Thank you too, Stan. Absolutely. Thank you very much. See you in August. Yep. See you in August too. Just a little over a week away before the Amazon series starts. I honestly think a large majority of you guys are already in that though. So that's great. Being in this particular series will definitely help you to get easier understanding out of the next Amazon series, since there will be parts of it where I touch on using cPanel or HTML or CSS, for example. So those parts should be a lot easier for you guys. Thank you, Stan. I'm glad you think I'm a great teacher. I suppose it runs in my blood. My mother is actually a real teacher. She teaches biology and chemistry, and she's done everything from elementary to middle school up to high school. She lives down in Florida, though, so I don't get to see her too often, but I suppose teaching runs in the family, and I don't view it as a job. I really enjoy doing this type of work and sharing this information with others and helping people learn things that can actually help to make a real difference with what they're trying to achieve. Any other questions, guys? I guess last call for questions. And if not, again, feel free to contact me. All my Facebook information is right here, my personal Facebook page. If you'd like to send me a friend request just to be able to say hi every now and again or just see what I'm up to. I actually post a lot of personal things about myself over there, and my wife posts a ton of personal stuff, which half of it ends up showing up on my page as well. And you know, I keep in touch with people through Facebook, through my personal page at least. Is not heavily business oriented. You know, so if you come and send me a friend request, then I'm not going to automatically start like promoting Facebook advertisements to you or anything as a result of that. Through my business page, I do send notifications out on my business page when I release new products or start a new webinar series, for example. So that is a little more advertising oriented than my personal pages, obviously. And then with my Facebook group, this is for Amazon affiliates, and obviously I know this Techie Masterclass and Amazon really have nothing to do with each other, but since Amazon is kind of the main thing that I do and I'm known for doing, and a lot of you guys are customers of mine because of Amazon products of mine, I still thought it would be relevant to include that here. This Amazon Facebook group is one that I created myself, and have not set it up too horribly long ago, and I have not even really done major promotions to attract people into this Facebook group. It's a lot of other like-minded customers just like you guys that are customers of my Amazon products typically that are in that group, and there's honestly really nothing going on over there yet. However, if you would like to go ahead and join it and simply ask me questions over there, I will be more than happy to go into that and respond to your questions even in great detail for you, completely free of charge, just to help you out and to help out other people that are there in the group. And eventually this will be a busier group as I add more and more people to it and conversations actually get started up. But in the meantime, you can actually take advantage of it and get a little bit of free help from me through there if you would like. And if there are no other questions, guys, I'll go ahead and call it a night. I'll wait just another minute or two just to make sure that nobody has any other questions for me here. And again, if you come up with something at a later point in time, just send me a message on Facebook or send me an email. Doesn't matter. I'd be more than happy to help you out there. Thank you, George. See you at the Amazon class also. Appreciate you attending both of them, and hope you enjoyed my Techie Masterclass series. I guess one final question that I could ask you guys: are there additional technical related topics or things that you guys would have any interest in learning? I do not have a current plan for another Techie Masterclass series. However, I have considered setting one up for, in the future, most likely after my next Amazon series is over with. And obviously I could come up with my own topics to do for these, but I just thought I would run them by you guys and see if anybody had any particular thoughts on things that they might like to learn. For example, perhaps a class on actually how to develop your own WordPress plugins, for example. Yes, I do WordPress plugins, Colm. You're very welcome. I'm glad you found everything to be very clear. Feel free to let me know if you have any questions at a later point in time, Colm. What do I think of building sites that utilize ads? Are you talking about a specific type of ad, Will? Blog type or theme-based sites? Like sites that essentially only exist for the advertising that's on them? I won't share your domain with the group here. I might need to find out a little more information about that to give you a good answer. I'm not entirely sure of the type of ads you're referring to. Let's see, let me take a look at that. Okay, I think I see what you're referring to now, Will. Yeah, this site does have quite a bit of advertisements on it. A lot of sites that heavily use advertising and appear to be very popular websites. Pull this over here for everybody else, just so I don't sound like I'm crazy and talking to myself. A lot of these sites, like this one in particular, Natural News, 386,000 people liking it. Now I don't know for sure because obviously I've never been to this website before, but okay, you have a specific page here. Let me open that up. I think that a lot of websites, like take Facebook as an example. When Facebook first started, there was no advertising on Facebook. A lot of these larger corporations, when they put together a major website, for example, especially one that's intended to be helpful for people, they will often begin without advertising, which helps them to get popular and to gain a following, and then the advertising will come later. Wow, I see what you're talking about. All over here, these look like this almost looks like it could be sponsors. These a lot of these links are direct links. So this appears to be advertising that like this site is actually selling. Yeah, it looks like there's a page for advertising information here. Obviously they are doing this only because they have a massive audience that they actually reach through their site. So they can sell direct advertising actually on their website instead of using affiliate advertising, for example, even though they are obviously also still using affiliate advertising. This particular site is loaded with advertisements here. I'm not a huge fan of sites that use a ton of advertising. However, if you ever build a website where you have an audience of 250,000 people or more, then this is kind of where the real money comes from. I almost guarantee they make a lot more off of these sponsored ads over here than they're actually making, for example, off of potentially their Google ads up here at the top. It's hard to say what some of these other ads may be. These could be potentially commission junction ads, or maybe even from a different network completely. It looks like this is a newsletter for their own website. Looks like they just have a wide variety of different things. They even have their own store where you can buy stuff from. I guess that's what I think of building sites that utilize ads. I'm not 100% sure what the right question to answer there is, though, for you. Did that answer your question, Will? Or was there something specific about the advertising? Yeah, somebody is making a lot of money. Now, I don't know what these advertisements actually cost here, but just for an example, are sites like that buildable? Well, as I was mentioning before, you don't start by building a site like this and selling advertising on it immediately. You start by building the site and providing, the useful, unique content. And then once you build up enough of an audience base and you have, a large enough audience that people would actually be paying to reach. Just for example, this site here says that they have over 4 million unique user hits per month and 10 million page views per month. They have over 30,000 unique articles on the site and over 12,000 keyword-specific pages. So a site like this, while it's possible to build, typically one individual person is never going to be able to create a website like this. I almost guarantee that this is run by like some type of company and likely even has an office building with a whole staff of writers sitting around pumping out these articles on a regular basis. And they're obviously decent length, probably decent quality articles, which helps them to attract that much traffic and audience. But the website and the content comes first, and then the sponsored advertising comes later. It looks like there might even be not filling them in with ClickBank ads, but here's actually a ClickBank ad. Probably an actual advertiser who has gone and purchased an advertising spot on this site, and they're probably promoting a product directly through ClickBank. Okay, I see, Will. You want to build a site that will allow others to post on it. Just go for something that encourages that interaction. Here's one little quick. I think your that website name that you gave me might actually be a good choice for something like that, Will. Because something that you guys have probably heard of Don Wilson, I'm assuming, the Facebook ad guy. At least somebody tell me they've heard of him before. I don't know. He's Donald Wilson, Don Wilson. Okay, Stan has. He's huge. He's like, the #1 name in Facebook advertising. in terms of, he's a marketer like I am, develops his own products, and but he primarily does Facebook advertising. Now, I've met the guy in person. He's a complete, excuse my French, douchebag. However, yeah, some of the information that he teaches is actually good information. Now, I've never bought any products of his or anything, but I've attended some live marketing conferences. I went to like the Warrior event in Raleigh this past April, and Don Wilson was one of the speakers there. And one of the things that he was actually teaching in terms of Facebook advertisements and why he is so successful. Yeah, I'm not publicly releasing these recordings, Stan, so that's okay. I typically don't say anything bad about any other marketers, no matter how much I dislike them, but there are some extremely successful marketers out there who pretend like they care and they really don't. And I honestly, genuinely felt like he was one of those. Me and other marketing friends of mine, other Amazon developers that were there, tried to approach him, and he really would not even give anybody the time of day. He'd just be like, kind of blow you off. And I don't know. I don't like the fact that so many people look up to and respect him, and yet he can't even take a moment to be nice to anybody who's not in his immediate circle of friends, or perhaps one of his customers. I don't know what he's like with his customers at all. Anyways, getting back to the point I mentioned all this to begin with, the thing that he recommends with Facebook advertising, when you're targeting a particular niche within Facebook, is actually he's looking for some type of topic that maybe not everybody's completely happy with. He's looking for some type of controversy with his topics. For example, this year, a really big controversial topic has been gun control, for example, especially in the United States. That was one particular niche that he targeted. And it seems strange in a way. Yes, he's a rabble-rouser. Exactly, Will. It's a perfect way to say it. But there are a lot of people out there like that. You may not be able to get somebody to make a comment on something that they like or are interested in, but you may be able to get them to comment on something that they hate or have some kind of a passion for or against it very, very strongly in one way or another. Yeah, that emotional hook, that's exactly what gets them. And while that strategy is, was taught and directed from a Facebook advertising standpoint, it's honestly something that could be used even outside of Facebook, even on your own Amazon affiliate websites, for example. Try to target some type of controversial niche in one way or another. You're going to have lovers of it, and then you're going to have haters of it. But it's when you bring the lovers and the haters together and get them all riled up and talking with each other is really kind of when it starts to take over on its own and run with itself. Any other questions, you guys, before I call it a night here? I appreciate all of you coming out once again for this whole series, and I'll be sure to get tonight's recording post it up for you guys as quickly as I can. It takes a little bit longer the way I do it. I really don't like the GoToWebinar system. I've had people commenting, sending me emails saying that they're not able to watch the GoToWebinars replays that are actually sent out through that system. So for this reason, I've been loading them up on YouTube and simply embedding those videos onto my own web page. And those YouTube videos are not public videos. They're privately posted over there. Thanks again, everybody, for coming out. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Any one of these places here, or even through email or my support tickets. And I guess I'll be seeing a lot of you guys on August the 9th for my next series on Amazon. And if not, that's quite all right. I'm sure I'll talk to you guys another time. Have a good night, everybody. And see many of you again in another week or so. Hope you have a great night.